they've really been kind of pushing the limits against the big enterprise systems, and they've got a stellar team in place over there. The founders that I'm huge fans of, Roman and Lillian, Olga, and now Mike is on board. Mike's the VP of Sales, and he's going to be emceeing this topic today with 3 giants in our industry. Today the topic is digital transformation, how to operationalize your contracts to stay competitive. Our presenters today is Julie Honor, General Counsel at 3G Digital, Sangeeta Raghunathan, General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer at Ernan, and Breen Sullivan, General Counsel at Watermark. Mike, I'm going to hand it off to you to introduce our panelists today to give a further introduction of themselves and tackle this topic.
Awesome. Colin, thank you so much, not only for hosting us, but that gracious introduction. We are definitely joined by an all-star panel here today. And yesterday, as I was reviewing my slides here with our CEO, Olga, she made the comment, Mike, people don't come here to look at your slides, they come here to listen to the people talk. And so I am only going to show this slide right now because a lot of those that are listening to this probably have not heard of Parley Pro, or at least not super familiar with it. You'll hear the name a few times throughout as you've got 3 customers on the line, but wanted to just kind of show off the logo a little bit so that you guys will know what we're talking about when you hear a CLM solution and specifically Parley Pro. So I am actually going to go ahead and close out the logo and kick it off here for our panelists. So it's not really a presentation so much as it is just a discussion, and I'll be asking some questions, and we'll get some feedback, and all focused around how to operationalize your contracts to stay competitive. So why don't we start with introductions? Julie, since you're next to me in the box here, why don't you go ahead and get started, and then followed by
Sure.
Breen and then
I'm Julie Honor. Great. Julie Honor. I'm General Counsel at 3Q Digital. We're a growth marketing agency, one of the world's largest independent marketing agencies that we work with clients of all sizes to help accelerate their growth through digital marketing and other opportunities. I would say this is my 3rd GC role, building a legal department from scratch. I love it, and I take a change management approach to it. So this is right up my wheelhouse, and excited to be here today. Thanks, Mike.
Fantastic. Breen.
Hi, my name is Breen Sullivan, and I also am a career general counsel who has created the legal functions at 3 separate companies. I didn't realize we had that in common, Julie. I am, up until just actually very recently, I was the Chief Administrative Officer and General Counsel at Watermark Insights, which is an education technology company. I am now full-time at the 4th Floor, which is actually a company that I founded, which connects female professionals with female founders to serve on their advisory boards and their board of directors, and also to find investment opportunities for the startup. So I think that about sums me up.
All right. Well, welcome. Sangeeta.
Hi, my name is Sangeeta Raghunathan. I too have the scars of being a career GC that comes into companies without legal functions and then starts from scratch. I'm currently General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer for Ernan, which is a fintech platform that is designed to help customers improve their financial lives based on a voluntary tip model for services. Previously at a crowdfunding site called Indiegogo as General Counsel there as well, and have lots of experience with the implementing contract management systems. So excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining. And as we're going along, often you will probably be asking yourself, can I see the product? Can I see what you guys are all talking about? And the short answer is yes, after the webinar, because we actually will include a little bit of a quick demo with the follow-up material here. And so when you guys hear about things, know that you'll be able to see it shortly. So, did we lose Julie? Sangeeta, let's start with you. We're talking about implementing a CLM, and I guess the best place to start is, why did you decide to explore a CLM solution?
So I think the other panelists will have this experience as well, right? When you start in a company that's been around for a while, but that has never had a legal function, right? The first thing that you have on your checklist is like, look for the contracts, right? Host what I call contract amnesty day. Everybody dig through your emails and just send it to me, and no questions asked. I'm not going to judge. I just want them. So I hosted contract amnesty day, and then I got a giant flood of contracts, and I was like, what do I do with all this? Like, I literally, like, everything was named wrong. There was just no rhyme, reason, or organization to the structure. So then you think, okay, like, what do I do with this, right? And I think a smart general counsel, especially one where you're starting off and you probably don't have a big team, looks for a system where you think, let me impose some order to the chaos. And so that kicked off my search for a CLM tool that I actually. The main requirement was that, like, a person like me, who's, like, a middle-aged woman who, and I won't say that negative way, a person who's not going to spend a lot of time on implementation or coding or anything like that, I should really do this self-service, right? And so that was a requirement number one for me.
Awesome. Breen, how about you? You want to go talk a little bit about why CLM?
Yes, absolutely. So for me, coming from actually 2 out of the 3 companies I was at were SaaS companies. And so what that means is frequently at a SaaS company, you have a master, some sort of master subscription agreement, and you need to be able to very efficiently negotiate and lock into place terms that are as consistent as possible across a really large customer base. So, typically at a SaaS company, you're talking about thousands of customers, so you're talking about, thousands and thousands of contracts. And in higher education, you're dealing with institutions of higher learning. Frequently, you might have multiple subscriptions in place with even just one client. So, thousands of clients, and then, potentially like thousands more subscriptions that are connected to, those overarching agreements with the 1,000 clients. So, right there's obviously just a lot of paper. And the single most important thing well, there's lots of things that are important in a SaaS model, but when it comes to contracting, you really want consistency in terms of the terms. And that's important, for risk. That's important, just make sure you're in line with that overarching, business model for a SaaS product. And so a contract system like Parley Pro is just essential. If you don't have it, you're dealing with, all types of people in the organization who can alter terms and who can negotiate, separate arrangements that are not at all in line with the product that you're actually putting out to the market. And that's just one example of the many things that go awry without a really robust contract management system, and especially one like Parley Pro that I can't say enough things about, and which hopefully I'll say more good things in this call about.
We've got 30 minutes together, 35 more minutes together, so plenty of time. Julie, go ahead and share some of your thoughts on why a CLM system in general.
Similar reasons to what Breen and Sangeeta already articulated, but I think a little different from what they had articulated is that we're, as a services-based company, every minute that you delay in getting your services started is revenue that you're losing. And so being able to quickly get contracts put together with the right approvals, with the right team, getting input with the right visibility to make sure that you're resourcing appropriately was another really important factor for us. So having the workflow capabilities of contract creation and really real-time collaboration was something really important to us to figure out how can we create that. We found really great success with Parley Pro and we're loving it. In addition to everything once it's executed, having a really clear dashboard of what does your contractual world look like? What's expiring? Can you stay on top of it? Making sure that you're being a partner with the sales team and the client management team to really help them negotiate those relationships successfully and not have any surprises. So those were kind of the 2 main factors that we were looking for within a CLM.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I heard a lot of things there. I heard from, keeping track and making sure that you're auditing correctly. You've got to work with speed, managing your people to make sure that they're not going off on directions maybe they shouldn't be going. and just having a good understanding of what contracts you have in place. So because they can all be in different places. And so you guys were touching on some of these items already as far as like how you went about to choose a CLM, but is there any more details that you would share when you're thinking about helping our audience understand, here's things to think about when choosing a CLM solution? And Breen, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, no, so I think one really big thing to think about is who your clients are. So for instance, in higher education, dealing with universities, they're not the most technologically advanced clients. And so they aren't necessarily comfortable negotiating with you inside a platform. Sometimes, even if you have one and it's great and it works really well, they still might refuse to do that. They might insist on taking a Word document, redlining, or doing whatever, and then sending it back to the attachment. So having a contract management system that can operate in both worlds, like on the one hand, like have a platform where you can negotiate, inside that platform, but then also have an option for those clients that are not willing to do that, where you still don't lose all the value of tracking the terms and having it logged within part of being part of that great analytics that Julie mentioned. You have the visibility, like what contracts say what needs to be renewed when. So that's a huge value add, is having those together.
Gotcha. That's great. Sangeetha, what about you? Anything else that you would add to that as far as basically when you were choosing a CLM solution, what was important to you?
Yeah, for me, really, it was analytics and reporting. And as now on startup number 3, I've really learned the value of what those two different metrics can do for you, right? In terms of, in a startup, your life will largely be surrounded around fundraising, right? And so you do want to very, very, very quickly be able to pull together your contracts in a form that would be responsive to any type of due diligence request, right? And so I think the ability to very quickly, once you've done the hard work of tagging your contracts, really focusing on pulling the right reports so that you can very quickly respond to requests is really important. I think that's one of the big features that I liked from Parley Pro, was really that ability to, at a somewhat granular level, pull reports of different types of contracts. I think the other thing is analytics. In part, I think legal departments are expected to operate and report like the rest of the business. And the rest of the business has KPIs, they have numbers that they show. And so I think general counsels, I think the most robust conversations I typically see on GC networks is like, how do I demonstrate the value of what I'm doing? Like, what are the metrics that you track, right? And so for me, having that ability to very quickly pull reports on, SLAs with regards to turnaround time, like how much time we're spending on high value versus low value deals, and being able to really demonstrate value in terms of like numbers, especially when you're in a more data-based organization, really makes you fit in with the business a lot better. And I think those are two things that Parley Pro really helps GCs succeed at.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
sorry, Mike.
Go ahead, Julie.
I knew I was going to interrupt at one point. I didn't think it would be this early, and I apologize. But I think what we're hearing from both like Breen and Sangeetha is it's really important to understand your true requirements of what you want to get out of the technology, right? Whether it's reporting and analytics, whether it's collaboration, make sure you talk to all of your internal stakeholders when you're looking at embarking on the CLM adventure. Understanding your true requirements of what you want a system to do. Does your finance team need something? What does your sales team need? What all of your internal clients, what are the functions and features that you need within a system is a really important step that a lot of people often skip. And so take that time to really think of the true requirements you need. And then the other step and tip I would give for the audience here is to make sure you truly understand your process and map it out. Because putting technology on a crappy process is going to result in a continued crappy experience. So it's really worthwhile to take the time to truly understand what process are you implementing this technology within, and are there some optimizations within that process that you can make to make it a better experience for everybody and a more successful CLM implementation at the end of the day too.
Yeah, I love that. And I agree with everything that both of you guys are saying. And one other thing I left out of my answer that I think is also extremely important and was important when you're dealing with, these sort of analog clients, it's third-party paper, because whether you're services or you're SaaS, I mean, especially if you're services or you're more bespoke, but even if you're SaaS, you still have a lot of clients that insist on giving you addendums and giving you, attachments of one sort or another, and especially with privacy and security, which is, certainly anything connected to technology. This is just it's huge. And it's only increasing in terms of the criteria and the attachments and the addenda that get thrust upon you. And then you have to incorporate them into, like, on the one hand, the process, like Julie, you're mentioning, but also the paper. So it's very, very hard to do that manually. And when you're talking about thousands, I don't think it's really possible. So Parley Pro, given its flexibility and given it's really, it feels like it's kind of built to assist with, to support that type of third party additions being woven into your contracting paper and system. And so, that certainly was critical for Watermark. And I think it also can just be very helpful, even when it comes to like security and privacy and compliance, and working with your CISO or your security team to make sure that you're also getting the benefit out of having that type of compliance process, when it comes to, like obtaining your SOC 2 Type 2, for instance. So
I think, to kind of take upon this, I think really great thoughts, because it really encompasses the idea that you have to really pull your stakeholders, right? Like it's not, you're not building a process in a vacuum, you're building a process across a company. I think one thing that was always good is really important to also think about in that vein is really what the API integrations are for the platform that you're choosing, right? Because I was like, I'm the GC, I could just have whatever tool I want, right? And that's actually not the true, right? Like if you're gonna force the rest of your business to run their tools through a security process, then you should be willing to have your own tool go through that as well, right? I remember when I onboarded Parley Pro, Lillian filled out the WSTIC form that our CISO requires, right? And that's an expectation. So having, I think, a platform that appreciates that they're gonna have to go through a certain amount of diligence and is able to actually make it through that diligence is really important. So that's one thing I think to think about. The other one is just the API integrations as well, right? Nobody likes manual data entry. And so, a lot of us, I've been to a lot of conferences, legal conferences, where people like legal uses Jira because that's the tool that's available for project management, right? So like, is there a way to import the data from the system that everybody uses, whether it be Jira or Monday.com or whatever other systems they're using for project management, or Salesforce, so that you don't have to then make your team repeat manual entry or then have someone do that yourself, right? So how does it play well with others, I think, is a really important piece of the requirements puzzle.
Yeah, and then building on the playing well with others is understanding what the tool can do from a workflow customization standpoint. There's so many tools out there that you're trying to fit your square process into a round hole. And Parley Pro had a lot of flexibility that we were able to bring in their different aspects of the workflow to make it really easy for us. So it's an important thing to just understand how your workflow looks and your process looks versus what the tool is capable of doing and how much effort it's going to take to make it work for what you want it to do. Parley Pro ended up being really fantastic for us for that because it had so much flexibility there with us.
How much of that, Julie, did you think about prior to researching CLM solutions, and how much did you kind of learn on the fly?
I would say the first time I implemented a CLM solution, it was a more of on the fly. This is my fourth time implementing, this is my third time implementing a contract management solution, my fifth time implementing a technology solution on top of a process. And so it's been a lot of lessons learned over time of really understanding what are the best practices and what steps is it really worthwhile to take up front to really make it easier and less headaches and less surprises as you move down the way. And so we took a very focused approach of understand our requirements, understand our process, understand the questions to evaluate each of the technologies on to make sure that it would fit within our needs truly, without having to scramble on the back end once we made a decision and have any buyers regret.
Right. Okay. Breen, maybe this will be for you, and this kind of like ties into what Julie's saying. There's probably a lot of listeners that have never implemented a CLM solution. Are there like table stakes that you have with the technology that you want to look at versus kind of nice to haves or any recommendations that you're like, this, you definitely need to make sure this is available?
Yeah, I mean, I think like for this particular RFP process where we ended up with Parley Pro, we were just so anxious to find a solution that, any solution. It could be imperfect, didn't matter. It would have been so much better than what I
Luckily, it didn't end up that way, right? So
no, but that's how we started it. It was really, we were desperate. Like, we were just desperate for something because we were a SaaS company that actually had 6 legacy companies. So, lots of complexity and none of those legacy companies had contract solution platforms or even really had consistent terms. The whole thing was crazy. And so we knew it was really table stakes just to have a system and to, get in charge, get out in front, have a process, have terms that were controlled and locked in. And so I would say our bar was really low. And so we just started meeting with contract management solution providers and we would see, okay, oh, wow, this seems great because it's so much better than what we have, which is nothing. But then we meet with another one and we're like, oh, wait, now this provider has like this other thing that now, now that we know that's even possible, of course we would go with this because this is so important, for this thing and that thing. But, so this kept going on for a long time. It actually is not quick. And that would be another word of advice, for companies embarking on this journey. And it is a process. You do have to have a fair amount. You have to explore. As you get closer with one solution versus another, you'll realize where the holes are, where the missing pieces or the utility that that one has, but the other doesn't have. So this was our experience. And we did this for a long time with a bunch of different providers. And then I heard about Parley Pro really after we were mostly done with this RFP process, but it was so strongly recommended that I couldn't, and it was such an authentic, long email recommendation with no skin in the game, just I love this so much, I have to write a page about it. So it was so compelling that we were okay, we just have to try. We can't pick one of these other solutions. And so even though we just thought for sure we would rule you guys out, we would do one quick demo and then we'd just be okay, they're not, they're the same as one of these other providers. And that was not what happened. I mean, we had the one demo and we were oh wait, now we've learned about all of the problems with all of these existing systems. And then Parley Pro, so we knew all the questions to ask because we knew exactly what the other ones were missing, and then Parley Pro had everything. So for us, it really felt like that. I mean, it was just a clear, no question, and that was unanimous. So that was the experience with Parley Pro in particular. But I guess from my perspective, it seems like all the different utilities that you can extract from one of these platforms, Parley Pro's got them. Versus all the other solutions, they have one or they have a few, but they don't have them all. So that's what it felt like going through that RFP process.
Right.
I remember when I went through the demo with Lillian, after she was done, I was like, gosh, Lillian, how'd you get into my head? How did you figure out all the problems that I always deal with when I have when I've used different contract management systems? And so it was just very intuitive. I was oh, of course the system should do this. And of course the system should do that. And why did I have lower expectations before? So I do think that it looks at it from the perspective of a lawyer that has to deal with technology and sorry, you didn't ask me the question, but I'll answer anyway. For me, it had to be, I feel the RFP process could be long, but the implementation time had to be super short. I did not want to I didn't have the resources or a team to be implementing, and Lillian said, who's implementing this? I was that would be me, right? And it cannot be hard to do. And that was a huge requirement. And the other one I think was just, just that ability to really take my department, of whether I'm 1 or now 10 people, you know, like I wanted this to level us up. You know, I wanted this to make us look like we were a professionally run team that had its like shit together. Sorry for my language. But that's what I want. That's what I expected it to do, right? And my sort of greatest testament is that my CEO will like go into Parley Pro and like answer my comments. Like he's like, I'm going to use this tool, and he will not use a tool that he doesn't like. But he is more than willing to go in and like use the comments features and like provide his feedback in it, and like likes the audit trail. So I think that beyond me, like getting your, you know, probably the person that has the least amount of time to use your tool is like a fantastic testament to whether the product is, you know, customer friendly.
Right. Well, I was about to ask you that question, so thank you for chiming in. Julie, I think I'll hand it over to you. You know, I mean, again, to reiterate the question is like, is there particular differences of functionality where you were like, this is a nice to have versus this is a gotta have, and if you were to give advice for people that are listening?
Yeah, so having gone through multiple CLM tools in the past and implementing them in the past, one of the key things for us was ease of implementation. We have a fantastic tech team, but they are a small but mighty team. And so we wanted to make sure that we were utilizing our resources wisely. And I mean, it was very minimal. I mean, Parley Pro's done all the work for us. The implementation was great. At my last time I did like a full-on CLM implementation, it was a 7-month long process of building that we had to hire a tech person to manage the instance itself, which is just like Salesforce administrator. I don't want a CLM administrator, right? That's another headcount on top of the technology cost. And, you know, we're already viewed as a cost center, right? We're trying to show how we can be efficient and not add more dollars on the backside there. So that was one aspect that was important to us, is having ease of implementation. And then we really tried to take the view of what are our end users looking for, right? So our end users were our internal clients of our C-suite. What type of dashboard do they want to be able to see to really make good, clear business decisions? What is going to really help our sales team and our client-facing teams to really get to revenue in the door faster? And that would be to have a swift process that everything is all in one place instead of email and Drive and Slack and 6 other locations where you're having version control issues. We needed to get rid of that problem and have everything just live in one place. And we found that solution with Parley Pro, which worked out, it's been great. So in our C-suite, just like you, Sangeet, our C-suite, and they're commenting back and forth and working within the platform, which is really great to see the adoption.
Are there any questions that you would recommend our listeners ask a CLM vendor to help kind of hash out a little bit of the implementation? Is it just simple as like, how long is your implementation, or what is the process? Is there anything that would help them hash that out? Because it sounds like implementation time is something that's pretty important.
Yeah, I think understanding time and cost, right? So if you get your statement of work from the CLM provider and you see an implementation fee or implementation cost, that should be a big red flag for you to understand, what is this? How long is it going to take? What resources are required on our end? And that was not even a component of the Parley Pro scope, because it was just included as part of being a member of the platform or investing in the platform. And so that was a really positive sign to us that this is going to be pretty easy. And it was, I think, just asking that very clear question of what resources from us will you need to get this implemented? And when you hear none, it's just like music to your ears, because we're busy, right? Especially as like a small single person or like 2 to 3 person departments. I don't have time to do a full on CLM implementation on top of being a lawyer for the company. So it was just, it's really valuable to ask that question of like, what resources are needed.
I think one good question, I can think of a couple, but one has to do with legacy contracts. So all of the other contract management system providers we spoke with, none of them do what Parley Pro do. So Parley Pro at least, when we were contracting, I don't know if this is still what you guys do, but you guys were willing, like you will actually take all of our legacy contracts and get them, like organize them and, tag, as long as they're in an Excel spreadsheet where, certain parts of those contracts are already flagged internally, you take it to that next level within your system. So then they're showing up on the dashboard. And the fact that you guys will do that, like that's huge, because otherwise every other provider, we were like, okay, we're gonna have to hire a temp, like they're gonna have to manually scan all of these things, like tag these things, and that's head count. It's also just a pain. It also probably will never happen, so that's a really big one. I also, it also seemed like you guys had the most functionality in terms of what you could do with legacy contracts compared to the other vendors. And then, oh God, it just flew out of my head. But I had another thing, so you'll have to come back to me when it flies.
We'll come back to you. So one piece that I do want to touch on, because I think there's a lot of folks that are going to be listening that are like, wow, a CLM solution would really save me a lot of time. It could be really powerful. However, you need to sell that internally, probably before you even start talking to any vendors. And maybe Sangeeta, we'll start with you. Just the idea of putting together an ROI for almost internal stakeholders to get them on board that this is something that's going to add value. Any thoughts?
I'm going to add one more thing to the prior question, and then I'm going to jump to this one, if you don't mind. I think one of the most important questions to ask when you're deciding on the system is there a fee per contract? Because half your contracts shouldn't be in the system and half of them not, because you had to pay a per contract fee, right? And that's one of the things that a system needs to appreciate, that you may have many different forms of templates, and you may be adding templates, you may want to change templates. You certainly shouldn't be locked into a situation where you don't have the flexibility to adjust your templates or even adjust the types of contracts that can be run through the system. I don't think that's a very holistic view. So then that's my thought. So with regards to an ROI, I think for me, the most valuable thing that I sort of viewed at internally was being able to pitch to the company that we would be able to get through a due diligence quickly, right? We're a startup. We're going to be constantly fundraising, I hope. We are a fintech, so that means that we have a lot of third-party audit requirements that are imposed on us. Banking partners, various different partners, right? They all have audit rights. And so I pitched that, either I can have a team of people sitting here, going through flagging contracts and tagging them and constantly producing for very, very specific requests, or I could have a system where I could probably on a, Friday night of the request comes in, probably turn that around by Saturday morning, right? And I could do that by myself. And that was really what basically won the company over, is that they thought, well, okay, where do we want to assign headcount, right? Do we want to give her 10 people? So this is manual, and there's no operationalizing of these requests, right? Especially regulated entities are going to constantly have to produce things all the time. And that shouldn't just be thought of as a one-time cost, and it's over. It's a continuous thing. And so you invest in continuous and sort of maintaining that. And so for me, that was the pitch. As I said, I could probably do this in 48 hours if I had a system. And in fact, I did. And so I was, that was the return, was that I said this, and that actually the system functioned in a way where I could actually make good on my promise. So I think that's one way to think about it, is giving kind of real life examples of if you don't have this system, here's what the path would be, versus if you have a system, here's what the path would be, and here's the time it's going to take. And just doing I just did a back of the envelope calculation of cost. I'm we can invest X thousands of dollars in a system, or we can invest 10 times 10X of that in people and time, and we probably won't make the request, we won't be able to report for 3 or 4 weeks. So.
Yeah. The balance of, sometimes it can be a soft cost with time. The people, sometimes leadership just work harder, but often it's well, we need that time because of a lot of requests, but the hard cost of, well, we don't have to hire this person if we get this solution, and you're going to be getting information faster.
Right.
Yeah.
I think a different way to
Yeah.
I think
Go ahead.
another way to frame the ROI or kind of the business case for getting the tool is if you view contracts as your like gateway to revenue. As I mentioned earlier, like every minute you can get a contract signed faster, or every renewal that you're on top of, or expiration date that you keep track of, that is revenue in the door. That is growth for your company. And so within Parley Pro, you can even track how long things are taking. Is one department taking longer than the other to review? Is the client taking long? How long does it take to go through legal? And you can really optimize to a really nuanced level to figure out how to make your contracts go as swiftly as they can to have revenue in the door as fast as possible. And so that's how we presented our business case of like, look, it's going to be everything in one place. You're not going to have the version control issues. It's going to be easy to find everything, track all of your dates, and draft them faster to get them signed faster. And that's growth right there. So that was our business case.
Yeah, I mean, both of what you said, I second. And I think, Julie, that was probably the most compelling business case at Watermark as well, because it's just more money in the door. Because not only does it totally speed up the contracting process, but it also might make it easier for some clients to sign. Because, once you have a tool and a system and everything's consistent and you can, like who to hit up to add on an additional service, or, it just like once it's automated and once it's streamlined, then you're kind of able to circumvent some procurement departments. So they're not, because versus if you don't have a system like Parley Pro and it can't just kind of look and feel like a SaaS contract, which is typically an order form with terms, incorporated at the bottom. But instead, it really looks and feels like a contract. Like, forget about it. There's a whole bunch of clients out there that then you're going to have to negotiate a giant contract with them that turns, and I'm not even joking, that will become like a 50-page contract for a SaaS license. And it takes 6 months. And it's because you gave them a contract. Like if instead you have a tool that helps to, streamline and automate, and it doesn't really raise that giant red flag internally that it's a contract, that was a really appealing thing for business stakeholders on our side.
I think the other thing that, in terms, it not only helps bring revenue in, it kind of keeps costs down, right? And, sort of in pandemic time, I think a lot of companies had to look very quickly for cost reduction, right? And so like the first report I ran was like, what are the contracts where we have termination for convenience? And I just like spit out a list, and we went down and we're like, do we need these vendors? And I feel bad for some of the vendors, right? But like we needed to do, it was either we had to reduce headcount or we had to reduce, external vendor costs. So like definitely you can spend the time to negotiate with the vendors where you don't have termination for convenience, but that's obviously going to take a lot longer, and you're going to be like looking for breach. So we basically just went down and found every vendor that we could terminate for convenience. And then we terminated those if we needed to, right? And then I think the opposite of that was when we found out what vendors we couldn't terminate for convenience. It helped us prioritize that clause for the next round of negotiations, where we said, look, like maybe we pay a slightly higher price, but we need to terminate for convenience because we are in a time of so much uncertainty, right? And so like that particular clause, like became super important, and I don't typically care. I've not really cared about that a whole lot in my 19 years of being a lawyer, but like I really cared about it in the last 4 months. But it was nice to get that short list in short order and then just deploy people to go just deal with, take care of it, right? It helped us kind of get through this time in a way that I we'll see, but hopefully, that was one of the important tools that we needed to use.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's a great story of, the legal team really bringing a ton of value to the business and being able to really partner with them.
You often don't get to stand up at an all hands and say, my team helped reduce $1 million in cost, right? But like we did that week after week after week. So I think someone had a question about KPIs and metrics. Like that is one of my metrics actually. So
there you go. Money saved by the legal team. Right. Yeah, I mean,
my dad is proud.
You don't hear that very often. That's a fantastic piece, and we'll jump into the Q&A here in about 5 minutes. Two other things that I did want to ask you, and that is when you think about risk, there's a lot, like there's different ways to think about it, and it's like implementing a CLM system and just in general, like there potentially is risk with, are you investing in the right solution? But then there's also risk with the vendor that you choose. There's a lot of smaller vendors that are newer, companies that are kind of on the rise. And so I'd be interested in just kind of like overall how you guys were all thinking about just managing risk during the CLM purchase process, if you will. And Julie, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, that's actually a conversation my CFO and I had before we went with ParleyPro, because ParleyPro was newer to the game and was one of the newer players. And we loved the investment price point for us. But we were a little worried of like, what happens if ParleyPro doesn't stick around? And I have to say, yeah, as much as like we love ParleyPro, we want it to stick around. But if ParleyPro were to not be there, it was very easy for us to pull all of our data and pull all of our contracts very easily. And the worst that would happen is we had a really organized system of contracts and an organized database that we could upload to another system. And so we felt like the risk was really low. Like if something were to happen, the impact to that would be a very low impact, right? The probability was low, the impact of it was really low. So that didn't really play into our decision-making process because we could get things out. There are tools out there that it is like next to impossible to be able to get an organized database out of there when your contract's out there. That would be concerning. So I think it's important as you go through the selection process to understand how do you get your contracts out. I mean, ParleyPro is so great that we even have it integrated with Google Drive that it just dumps every signed contract into Google Drive as we wanted it to be organized. So we don't even have to have a scramble if anything were to happen. It's already on our system. We have our backups, we have our duplicates. So we felt like it was handled really well for us.
Yeah.
But it's definitely an important question, Mike.
Yeah. Well, I wish I could dive deeper into it with the others, but we've only got 2 more minutes until we've got the Q&A, and I could see there's a few questions there. So, Breen, maybe we'll start with you with kind of my last question. And it's 2 questions in one because I only have 1 question left, and that is, what are some like major lessons learned, as well as just any advice for our listeners?
Major lessons learned are that not all of these platforms and systems are created equal. And actually I did think, Geetha, when you talked about, one of the questions that everyone should be asking right out of the gate is, is this limited to a certain number of contracts? That reminded me of the other point that I was thinking about, which kind of also comes full circle with like, not all these platforms are created equal. And that's, some of them are set up in terms of a workflow system, and that may or may not make sense for your business, depending on complexity and depending on what you're trying to get this platform to manage for you. And some of the systems have to do with the number of licensees, like the number of people that are logging in. Again, that may or may not make sense for you. Like, how big is your sales team? Are you also using this internally, for like onboarding vendors and, labor and employment contracts? And then, if so, how many seats do you need? It might be way too many. So I think not all of these platforms are the same, even if it kind of seems like it at first. You really need to ask a lot of those questions and then think about what it will mean in terms of your internal and external processes that are connected to contract, connected to payment. Because that would be a really big lesson learned. And then the second question?
Just any advice that you would give outside of what you've already shared?
Start early, like start as soon as you can, because it not only does it take a long time in the RFP process, yes, it will take time to implement the system. No matter how fast ParleyPro is, like it will take time to implement, but also there is that just massive, gray space of getting stakeholder buy-in that I know Julie and Sangeetha have spoken about, which does take a lot of time. And, part of that is it depends on your company. It depends on the personalities of those stakeholders and, how amenable they are to like kind of jump in and go on that thought experiment with you about what does this process mean for sales? Where does this process fit into operations? Like, what does this process mean for finance? Like on the invoice side and with everything they're doing there in their systems. So, all of that is part of it. And it takes a long time. So I would say if you think you're going to do it in 3 months, you're probably going to do it in like 9 months. So
And a lot of that's upfront work, is what it sounds like. Sangeeta, what about you? Any thoughts here on just kind of key lessons learned or advice that you'd want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest takeaway is like, if you know your company, you should not expect your company to change. So if you're vetting a system where you, in the back of your mind, you think, God, I'm going to have to get all these people to change their ways and figure this out, like that's just not going to happen, right? Like, so, I mean, look at the system to see if it can slide into your culture and not the other way around. Like, don't expect your entire culture to change around your system. And so to me, like having beautiful product UX and having it like feel like other things that are familiar to your clients, your company is really, really important, because they're not going to change that much just for your CLM. So don't pick something that's going to make them have to change that much.
Yeah, right. So I heard preparation, time, and be realistic, I suppose, on what the what the company culture can be.
Usually a banking concept, but I think it's important anywhere. So do a KYC of your own customer, of your own self. So.
Yeah, I love it. Julie, how about you?
I just can't emphasize enough the importance it is to really pause to understand your business requirements of what you're doing and wanting to accomplish with the tool, and to really optimize your process. Like, it just will save you so much time and headaches in rolling it out. And if you do it with the right change management lens of incorporating your end users, helping people see themselves in the changes that are coming, getting their input as you go through the process, it's just going to be such a more successful and smooth implementation and adaptation at the end of the day. So it's really worth all that upfront work you do from a process standpoint that I would just encourage people to do.
Right. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I think I'll read some of the questions that we're getting through the chat window and kind of keep it in the same format here. So I'm just scroll up to the top here and get the first one. It says, do either of you, so do any of you, have written approval protocols within the company, and how do you see business teams comply with them? Protocols for agreeing with critical terms such as open-ended indemnity, etc.
So I can start.
Great.
So certainly the watermark protocol is actually, at every company I've worked at, yes, we've had protocols. The watermark's the most restrictive, as in only a couple of people in the company could sign, on behalf of the company. So when it's very, very limited to one or two people, I think it makes it a little easier, regardless of anything else, to control what ultimately is going out to the world, on behalf of your company. That being said, it, of course, is always a challenge. You always have, errant, things going on that you might, that even if that's your policy, and even if, you think it's clear, that there are misunderstandings. Sometimes people will sign stuff. And so having a contract management system, certainly that is one huge part of value, is that, like, on the one hand, it helps to mitigate against the backup when you just have one or two people who can sign. That can create an incredible backlog. So having the system helps mitigate against having just the one or two people that can sign, but also it helps you to just lock down and control templates, so that whoever falls outside the scope of signatory authority, it's harder for to get away with signing.
Right.
Yeah, we have a term approval matrix that has, for these terms, these are the people who can approve it at this contract level, at that contract level. And since we're a smaller legal department, we manage that internally now, but Parley Pro has the capability to build in approvals. Like, a contract over this amount has to be routed to this level of person for approval, versus a contract of a smaller amount can be routed to that. Parley Pro has those capabilities built in, which is really nice. We're not utilizing it right now. But we've been able to, it's important to understand what those protocols are. And if you have them, figure out if the tool can build them in, so that you can minimize the oops, I forgot to ask so-and-so,
right.
issues that could happen.
Right.
Yeah, and I think the question is really probably really relevant if you're in a sales-driven organization where you have sales teams sending out contracts and they're trying to pull things through. And in that kind of organization, I do think it's important to have kind of that ability to like mix and match in like different levels of clauses. Like I'm a big believer in like a legal handbook. Like every company I've gone into, like I literally like generate. I copied my old one, but I have a legal handbook, right? And that includes basically like, here's what I approve, here's what my fallback is. I always have 2 fallbacks, and then if it doesn't go to that, then only escalate to me, right? And so I've had sales teams utilize that because when it's just been a very small legal team and I have to rely on the sales team, I train them. In a fintech, I don't do that actually. Because I think we have a lot more regulatory controls that we need to put in place. Like only our lawyers are able to negotiate, right? And we have very strict signing authority. And so every signer knows that they will not touch it unless it comes from legal DocuSign, which we completely control. We've integrated it through ParleyPro. So it depends on the level of like risk that your organization is going to be going through, right? Like if you have a lot of low dollar contracts, like maybe it doesn't matter so much as if you're signing something that's many millions of dollars and certain has other issues in it. So you have to think about that. But it's always really important to have some sort of like escalation matrix or, terms matrix.
Right. Yeah. Moving on to the next question, because I want to try to address all of them that are in the chat window. And Sangeeta, you talked a little bit about KPIs, and that's where this question is going. And it says, can you share any KPIs to manage legal resources which you are using? I know you talked about the KPIs of how much money are we saving the organization. Anybody else have any other kind of key performance indicators that you guys are thinking about?
Yeah, we look at the volume of contracts that are coming in. The dashboards in ParleyPro are great to show you. Like you can see just visually our contract tab for July is 3 times the size of June, right? Like it's showing like we have been crazy busy. So understand like the volume of contracts coming in, getting into the turnaround time, how long does it take from a contract to go from initiation to signature? How long does it take from a contract to sit in the legal team's inbox? Those are KPIs we look at to hold ourselves accountable to the organization of what SLA they can expect from us. And it's trackable and reportable. You can see if you're doing better or worse, depending on the volume. Those are kind of some of the bigger KPIs that we use currently. I've used other ones at other companies, like the contract value, like how large of these contracts or how many pages of a contract are you looking at. That's not as valuable to us than our current company set up right now.
Great.
I think another one that people use that I don't use, but I just will put it out there, is there is a KPI that people track around own paper versus third-party paper. But I actually really think that just depends on like your leverage and negotiating position, right? Like we're a fintech, we negotiate with banking partners, we're never going to use our paper. So I don't use that. So I guess it's more of a cautionary tale of like, don't impose a KPI on yourself that just makes no sense, right? That's unconnected with reality. To me, it's not that important that I use my own paper. It's more important that I get certain clauses, right? Or that I actually have my KPIs tracked around certain clauses, and do I get assignment, for example, right? Like those are valuable things, especially at a startup. Like was I able to get at least assignment without a consent, or assignment with notice, right? Rather than no assignment at all, because those are like add value at a startup. So I think there's a KPI that you can certainly track around specific clauses. Also KPIs by product team, right? Or by different teams, like how much are you handling on the HR side? How much are you handling on, product versus customer service? Because that way you can actually figure out like what your next hire needs to be. You may look for certain expertise in certain areas because you just realize I really have a lot of volume in this one area, and I might need someone with a little bit of expertise in this type of deal. So,
yeah. Breen, if you have anything that you'd like to share.
I'm listening, and I think all of these KPIs would be applicable, and I'm wondering if I have anything to add. I'm sure I do.
No pressure.
But I think all of that is true. I think at the cause level, absolutely. Oh, I do have something to add. Okay, so I think security and privacy. I think there is a place where there's KPI too, which so like trying to make sure that you're GDPR compliant and CCPA compliant as a SaaS company, then one of the things that you need to do is make sure that you have the right terms, the right data protection terms in place between you and all of your customers, and then between you and all of your vendors. And so that is something that Parley Pro would help you do, right? That helps you hit that KPI because you're tracking it all, you see it, you obviously can turn it into, you can templatize it, put it into the process on both ends. So that's one piece. And then I think and that's just one example. There's probably like 3 or 4 places where your security team, they are going to require, a certain array of documents that you have to request from all of your vendors in order to sign a contract with the vendor. So, that's another place where that's what I meant about the SOC 2 thing. It's not about whether or not Parley Pro is secure. It's about Parley Pro helping you administer, assessing the security of your vendors and or like how secure you are in relation to your customers.
Right. Great. I'm going to do 2 quick things here. We've got 2 more questions, and I'm going to just put up my email address as the final, which I have in my final slide. You can see I put these beautiful slides together. That's everything we talked about. And then here's my information for those that are interested that listen to this recording or are watching it live. And then we'll handle these last 2 questions before we drop off. And we got about 3 minutes. This question looks like a little bit of a question for me, actually. It says, how does the solution handle intake where almost anyone in the organization can submit a request for either contract review or drafting? Would each submitter require a separate license in order to submit? The short answer is yes. Based off of Parley Pro's licensing model, there are requesters and full access users. Okay. We can go into more depth of that, and reach me directly if you have any other questions about that. And I think this is the last question. How do you all conceptualize relationships between contract types, e.g. amendments or addenda?
Yeah, I think Parley Pro does a great job with that, to be honest. You can link all of your contracts within Parley Pro, and it shows up with a little icon if it's been linked. And so what we do is we have our NDA, and then we link our master service agreement whenever we enter into a master service agreement level with that customer. And then every SOW is linked to that MSA as a parent. And then if we do a change order to the SOW, we can mark which SOW is the parent to that change order. And so when you're looking at one SOW, I can hover over that little icon and it'll show me the 6 change orders that we've done for that contract. So that's been a really nice feature within Parley Pro to be able to see that visually.
Great. Well, anything else to add, Breen or Sangeeta? I think we will, otherwise we'll wrap this up. And thank Colin for his being a gracious host and allowing us to share some thoughts.
Yeah, guys, I just want to say this is probably my favorite session yet, webinar. Unbelievable panel. Thank you very much, Breen, Sangeeta, Julie, and Mike. This is great stuff. Just a couple of thoughts. I'm going to be sharing this with the legal operators member community on the Slack channel in the content channel. I will be following up later today or tomorrow with a copy of this recording, and I will be doing a recording with the founder of Parley Pro, Lillian Caldera, on some of the topics that we discussed today and very highlights. So probably a 15 to 20 minute demo, so you can kind of get an insight on what Parley Pro does and some visuals. With that, I'll hand it back. If you want to get in contact with Mike, it's mike.gross@parleypro.com. And if you have any questions for Colin at legaloperators.com, please reach out. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.